Of course.
Have you forgotten your joy?
Of course not. Snug as a bug on a drug.
Well, come on then, finish up.
Hello all you joy drugged up lovers of dystopian universes. As always, I am Cosmic, and today we're going to be previewing We Happy Few, which was in development currently on Early Access by Compulsion Games. When We Happy Few first popped onto my radar, I thought it was going to be very similar in the style to the BioShock series, where it was going to be quite a dystopian future. It was going to be a narratively driven first-person shooter experience, and much to my dismay, it isn't actually that. What it is a survival game in early access. Oh joy, that sounds great. And the interesting thing is, of course, that the full version of the game will feature a storyline and a narratively driven experience, which is ultimately, and I'll put it out there right at the start of the video, is ultimately where probably the game is going to lie in terms of actual likability, because currently I don't like any aspect of this game other than its overall aesthetic. Now, the reason for the early access launch is to obviously hone down the gameplay elements of the survival elements of the game. Now, let's talk about those survival elements. It's when the first game launched, it was ridiculous. It was a absolute travesty. Your character has to sleep, your character has to eat, and your character gets thirsty, as well as obviously having to heal, cure diseases, etc., etc. Now, the actual timers of those bars when the game launched on early access were ridiculously quick. You got tired very, very quickly. You got hungry and thirsty very, very quickly, and it made the game completely unfun. It was just pointless. It was trivial. There was nothing to do. You spent the entire time trying to nurse your character and handhold your character, make sure that their fatigue was good, make sure that they weren't hungry, make sure they weren't thirsty, and it made every other aspect of the game just pointless because you spent all your time trying to nurse your character. Thankfully, this has been patched somewhat, so you don't get as tired as quickly, you don't get hungry and thirsty as quickly, although it still is in there, and I've never been a big fan of those gameplay elements where I have to go around and make sure my character eats, sleeps, and drinks. It's just not fun. I do that in real life for myself. Why do I want to do that for a video game character? Now, I get that they're wanting to have survival elements in there, and I think that there is room for survival elements in any game. I think that this, however, currently where it stands in early access, it's all about the survival elements because there's nothing else in there. There's a couple of side quests which primarily all focus around crafting and survival. So you get quests to make bandages for people and try and help people, or you have to craft something to solve an objective, and that's it. That's all that's actually in there. There is a little bit of variety because the game world is procedurally generated, but it's just usually the same assets put in a different location. There's nothing new each time. You see the exact same locations just in a different order. So in that regard, it doesn't particularly add any spice to life, so to speak. And I have to say that currently I'm really, really underwhelmed by We Happy Few. Like I've said, I love the aesthetic, I love the lore, I love everything about the visual and sound. I think it is absolutely nailed down to a T. Where this game is ultimately going to shine is when the story drops. When the narrative is put into this game, that is hopefully going to make the game worthwhile. As it stands, I don't like it. As it stands currently in its early access version, I can't recommend people go and play it because it's not fun. There's nothing to do that is enjoyable. It's fun to look around and see all the different things, but ultimately the majority of the game isn't in there. And the narrative isn't in there, and that's ultimately what I'm interested in. And I think that's ultimately what most people are interested in who were drawn to this game in the first place. They are interested in the world, they are interested in the lore, they're interested in the story, and that's where I feel Compulsion Games need to look at this. They need to look at this as a BioShock game, because it's very similar to BioShock in some respects, and it ultimately needs to come across that way. It ultimately needs to focus on its narrative. When the full game launches, it needs to have a really good story campaign. It needs to be long, it needs to be full of stuff, and ultimately the survival elements will play a good key part in that overall story because you have to survive in this dystopian world, but it needs to be intrinsically involved in the narrative. You need to be able to go around and, so you have an objective to leave an island and you need to gather supplies, etc., and it needs to be that way. It can't be that the survival elements of the game are hampering the narrative progress of the game, because if that becomes the case, then this game is going to fail. It is going to fail flat out. If it becomes to the point where I'm spending more time looking for resources and crafting and ultimately trying to keep my character from starving, dying of thirst, or, having sleep deprivation, rather than actually exploring the world, looking through the story, looking through the lore, then it's not going to be fun in any aspect of the game whatsoever. And I really hope the Compulsion Games really nail this down, and I really hope that this game turns out to be something that I want it to be in terms of the potential that I can see in this game. This game has so much potential, so much potential right from the offset. You have people gripped already. You have people pulled in just for the sheer narrative experience of the game. That prologue that's in the early access version, that's the only part of the narrative that's actually in the early access, is so good. Like, that prologue gives me so much hope for the actual final game, and I really hope that the rest of the narrative is like that prologue, because that was just fantastic. And if they can keep that, and if that is what's coming, if the survival elements themselves are just in the early access, and it's all about the survival elements just so that they can nail it down and make sure that it's fun to play, then all power to them. But if that is what's coming in terms of the narrative, that prologue, then I'm going to be a very happy chap. It's rare for a developer to have a game that you could potentially make an instant classic straight off the bat. Already, they have the potential to do that with We Happy Few. They have a potential here to create something that is remembered as fondly as BioShock is. And if they nail it right in terms of the story content, you make sure that there's plenty of side quests, and those side quests are meaningful and tell their own stories within the world itself, then you're going to have a recipe for huge success. And really, the survival elements need toned down. Yes, I do want crafting. Crafting can be really fun, and I want meaningful crafting, and I want to be able to create things that will help me in the narrative and in quests, but I don't want to spend my entire time babysitting a virtual character, because that ain't fun. So that is my preview of We Happy Few. Thank you so much for watching and listening. As always, do like, subscribe. If you've played the game, let me know what your thoughts are, or if you haven't played the game, let me know what your initial impressions of the video are. And as always, I will see you next time.